I've stalked this sub for a while now and couldn't decide whether or not to post mine, but I'm feeling brave on a Monday. It was a very long time ago, back in 1973. I know it was summer. I was 6, and we were living on Monica Lane in Madison, Wisconsin. Thing is, I sort of recalled it, but never put two and two together until a few months ago when I was talking to my mom, who went into great detail. I was a very gregarious child, outgoing, extroverted, friends with anyone. It was at the time a middle-class neighborhood, and 3 houses down from ours on the same side of the street was a huge park. My mom was a nurse and my dad was a salesman, but mom worked second shift at Meritor, while my dad worked days. I rarely had a babysitter, only if they went out for dinner or a movie. But they did go out often, and there were always older kids in the neighborhood to babysit. One sitter, who I really liked, lived a few blocks or so away, and down the street a little bit. Vicky had babysat a few times before that, and it was pretty uneventful. She'd play games with me and do my hair, play dress up, pretty basic stuff. So, anyhow, one day I had gone with friends down to the park. I remember there was a ball field at the time, and a sand lot next to the field. My friends wanted to play in the monkey bars, but I wanted to play in the sand. I looked at the sandbox and my babysitter Vicky was standing there. I told my friends I was going down to the sandbox and ran off. We played in the sand, building a castle, and then she asked me if I wanted to go get something cold to drink. It was stifling hot, and I of course said yes. So she takes my hand and we start walking to her place. She starts telling me about her puppies and asking if I want to play with them. Of course I get giddy and now can't wait to get to her house. This was where my memory had stopped, and after my mom told me what happened, the rest of it flooded back. My mother just happened to be talking to my sister and I about some of the places we lived, and we got to Monica Lane. I told her I remember the park and how big it seemed, and she asked me if I remember being kidnapped. I immediately thought she was kidding, and then the look on her face told me otherwise. She said it was around 5 in the afternoon, and one of my friends had come to the door to ask me to come back outside, sure that I had gotten bored and walked back home. When my mom checked the house, she realized I wasn't there, and, 7 months pregnant with my sister, sprints to the park, screaming my name. After asking several kids if they'd seen me, with no clue, she went to the ball field and asked the older boys if they'd seen me. One of the boys, she guessed around 14, said that he'd seen a younger woman playing with a girl that fit my description in the sand and walk off in a general direction, and that was all he knew. My mom ran across the street to one of the houses and asked to use their phone and called the police. By the time the police got there, my dad had come home and some of the neighbors were trying to help my mom. So there's this search party out looking for me, screaming my name and knocking on doors. The police had got back to the park to ask the boys if they knew who had been with me and if they knew who she was. Between the boys and the neighbors, they had deduced who it was that had led me off, but I have no idea how, honestly. The police and the entourage go to her home. She lived with her parents, but they weren't home, and knock on the door. She came to the door and told them she hadn't seen me and that she'd been home all day. The police asked to come in, and for some reason she said okay. They went through the house and went to the basement and found me. That's what my mother knew. And then I remembered. It was literally like a floodgate had opened, and I started crying. At 6, you sort of trust everyone, and she'd been in our home. I never got a bad feeling from her, and my parents didn't either. But when we walked into our house, I remember that cold, holy fuck feeling washing over me, and getting very worried. I remember starting to cry and saying I wanted to go home, over and over. She takes me into her kitchen and gets me a glass of water and a tissue. I hear dogs barking, and next to the kitchen is an open stairway that goes down, and where the barking was coming from. She starts trying to cajole me into going downstairs, telling me there's all sorts of toys and games. I reluctantly agree, and she grabs my hand to head down the stairs. The dogs are going nuttier, and I start screaming. At this point, Vicky is acting fucking bizarre. She's screaming at me to shut the fuck up. If you don't shut up, I will throw you in the cage with the dogs, and they will eat you. Shut up. Dragging me down the stairs, and still screaming. I was scared out of my mind. I remember crying so hard I was hyperventilating, and I am screaming so hard I'm not making sounds. Vicky then flips a switch and starts being syrupy sweet, trying to calm me down. She tells me that she was just playing a game, and tells me she wants to play hide and seek. She must have been relatively skilled at calming me down, because the next thing I knew, I hear knocking on the door upstairs, and I wasn't crying. The houses were all the same sort of tract houses that Sears used to sell. Not huge, but not small, but you could hear everything at any spot in the house. I keep hearing the knocking, and she tells me that it's her friends. They're coming to play hide and seek. She convinced me to let her put a piece of masking tape over my mouth so I wouldn't make a sound, and lifted me into this big wooden box next to the kennel. She put a big pile of blankets over me and told me to be really quiet so they didn't find me. The whole time the dogs were going batshit, but when she calmed me down, they calmed down too. They still looked incredibly mean, but they were no longer frothing at the mouth, and only slightly growling. Until the knocking started. I remember scrunching in there, confused, still scared, and convinced that the dogs were going to get out and eat me. I was crying again, and hyperventilating. I remember taking the tape off of my mouth because I couldn't breathe, but remembered I needed to be quiet because I was afraid what she'd do if I screamed. I laid in that smelly box next to a big bag of dog food, sweating to hell, tears rolling down my face. I sort of pushed the blankets to the side, but only enough so that I could pull them back over me when someone came. I recall thinking about my dad and wondering if he'd come find me. All of a sudden, I hear what sounds like adults yelling my name. They came down the stairs and the dogs are going batshit again. Over and over, men are yelling my name, and then I hear a man say, "If you don't shut those fucking dogs up, I will." I was in a large storage box, like a carpenter's toolbox type of thing, with tape hanging off of my mouth when they opened the lid. I remember a very nice man asking my name and if I was okay. I don't remember answering him in anything other than screams and tears, and grabbing his neck so hard my dad had to practically pry me off of him. I remember my parents taking me to the hospital to be checked out, and that's all I really remember. Mom said that Vicky was found guilty of attempted kidnapping, and last she knew was in prison, but couldn't remember when the last time was that she had heard anything. We moved from the area shortly thereafter, and I haven't been back since. I do know that Mom said that her parents were odd, but they didn't know them. She had met Vicky from neighbors that had used her as a babysitter, and I never heard of anything bad, and that I always seemed happy with her. She lived in the general neighborhood, but it would have been 2 blocks over and 1 block down. Mom said they never picked her up. She always walked over. When they'd get home, they'd drive her home, but never noticed anything out of the ordinary. Mom and Dad had only met her parents when they came to the door to ask for forgiveness, that Vicky hadn't meant to do anything bad, and was a good girl. Mom said my dad picked up her dad by the shirt, and told him that if they ever came on our property again, he'd kill them. I remember her name and sort of what she looked like, but would have no idea if she walked up to me who she is. TLDR. I was kidnapped as a child, found within a few hours, and had completely blocked the memory. Edit. Because I think the dog breed is important, especially when you see it through a 6-year-old's eyes. They were huge Rottweilers, and to a child, it seemed like hellhounds. One day, when I was younger, my mom and I visited my aunt's apartment. It's a giant-looking house with a side driveway that leads around the back to a small parking lot for tenants, with the house entrances being off to the side, facing away and hidden from the busy street. I do not remember how old I and my cousin, my aunt's daughter, were. But to the best of my memory, we were both somewhere around the age of 8 and 12, with her being slightly older than I. It was still midday, and we were all hungry, so my mom and my aunt decided to go shopping, and were then going to pick up pizza on the way back for us all to eat. Me and my cousin were ecstatic, as we loved pizza. Our parents left, and me and my cousin stay and watch TV with the volume really low while browsing on our laptop. It's probably about 25 minutes after our parents left when we start seeing the front door locks shaking. We thought our parents were back home, but then we noticed something suspicious. Instead of the locks of the door quickly turning as if our parents got back, we instead saw that the locks were very slowly turning to unlock. We suddenly both realized it wasn't our parents, and definitely an intruder. We both stared at the front door silently, freaked out and frozen. I always thought that those horror movies where the actors stand frozen in fear like idiots were fake, but it was this moment that proved that idea wrong. As we both stood there frozen in horror, we saw the top lock finally turn all the way, after what felt like half a minute. Then we start to see the bottom lock slowly start to turn. The door was probably half a second from being unlocked completely, when suddenly my cousin breaks free from being frozen in fear and sprints to the door and turns both of the locks to prevent the door from being opened. We dared not look out the second-story window to see who was trying to get in. We were horrified and stayed quiet waiting in the living room. We didn't say a word to each other and just sat there on the couch. It was about 15 minutes later until our parents got home, where we told them the whole ordeal, and they were shocked. We don't know what would have happened if my cousin didn't sprint to lock the door, but to this day, I can remember very vividly seeing the door locks shaking rapidly and slowly turning. It was definitely very scary. This is a story that I was told by my mother when I was old enough to understand what had almost happened. I was only a few weeks old, and in those days, when a mother had given birth and taken their baby home, midwives were sent from the hospital to check on the baby and mother, once or twice a week, max. My dad was working, so he wasn't home, and my mother had put me to sleep and was going about her business in the house. These visits were only every week or so, and she had just had 2 midwives come in the morning the day before, so she knew immediately what happened next wasn't okay. She heard a knock, and so went to open the door. We lived in a close-knit community. There was rarely any threat to safety around there, but most of the people who lived by worked the whole day, as they were young healthy couples, so it was deserted at that time of the day. My mother was greeted by a male and female who were dressed in midwifery outfits, with hospital badges, and a very polite welcome, asking if they could come in. They explained that they had been sent by the hospital to check on her and the new baby. My mom let them in as they had all the professional clothes and badges and knew when my mother had given birth, etc. They even knew she had a little girl and my mother's name. Very convincing, but also all information that is easy to access. The male said he was going to take me upstairs and check over me, and the female would check over my mother downstairs. However, my mother didn't feel okay about them wanting to separate us, and she explained that a pair of midwives had already been there that week and said that she was going to ring the hospital to check, as nobody had notified her that some more were coming just a day or 2 after. She also said she warned them that her husband, my dad, was on his way home from work and wouldn't be happy about this. At this point, the pair got very defensive and said that they would leave after being really pushy with my mother to separate the 2 of us. Finally, she got the pair to leave, who quickly changed their behavior to being calmed down and said not to worry, it must have been a mistake, and not to bother checking with the hospital when my mom was trying to contact the hospital. What was even weirder is that when my mom opened the door, making them leave, there was another person waiting in a car outside, probably the getaway driver, who had the engine still running. When they left, my mother, scared, rang the hospital, who said they had not had any midwives scheduled to visit me and my mother, and that they always alert the mother if they're going to send midwives. They also said they would never ask to separate the mother and baby. They asked for a description of the midwives, and they said they didn't have a male midwife at the hospital where I was born, and to contact the police. Terrified, my mother called my dad, who came straight home, and they reported it to the police, who took descriptions, but never amounted to anything that we know of. Who knows what those pair were planning? It's so creepy that they had gained access to all the information that my mother had recently given birth. They must have been watching the house to know when my father wasn't home. They had even gone to the effort of having the uniform and badges made. Thank God my mother acted on her instinct and got them the hell out of the house and stuck to her guns. It's even more creepy to imagine what my life would be now if they had got to carry out what they were planning. I don't believe it could have been a genuine mix-up. They had not followed standard protocol in warning my mother they were visiting. They were very insistent on separating the two of us, and they were rude and defensive when my mother challenged them, which is not acceptable behavior from a health professional. I believe we were very lucky that they left without a fuss eventually. I hope I have never and will never meet those pair again, or any creepy impersonators with God knows what agenda behind them. And I hope they don't go and do this to any other new and vulnerable mothers. Back in the early to mid-80s, I had a paper route in a medium-sized southwestern Pennsylvania town. This would have happened in either 1983 or 1984. I was 13 or 14, depending on the year. I was out one night, collecting the subscription fees from my customers. It was winter, because I remember that the sky was dark. I don't remember there being snow on the ground, but I was usually done collecting by 6:30 p.m. That was on purpose because the penguins usually came on around 7 p.m. It was cold, and I had decided that I wanted a hot chocolate for the walk home. There was a convenience store near my paper route. Even now, at night, the area is fairly busy with cross-town traffic for a dead-end southwestern Pennsylvania town. Well, I headed on over to the store and got myself a nice cup of hot chocolate. I paid, and as I was walking out into the parking lot, a dude in a pickup truck with a cap over the bed called me over. I figured, for some reason, that he recognized my paperboy receipt book and thought I might know the area. 13-year-old logic, I guess. I suppose he was going to ask me for directions. There was some traffic and the lot was well lit, so I didn't feel any fear. I headed over to the truck and there were 3 occupants. The guy, much older than me, but not as old as my dad, and 2 cute girls who I recognized were older than me, but I don't know how much older. Dude looks straight at me and says, "These girls want to party. Get in." Direct quote. I'll never forget it. Now, I'm 13 or 14, pimply as hell, and I weighed about 95 pounds soaking wet with 20 pounds of sand in my pocket. These 2 chicks want to party with me? Sure. I'm a horny 13-year-old, but I'd seen a lot of videos in school. This shit was screaming stranger danger. I politely declined and started walking towards home. Dude sweetens the, pot. "Hey, she really thinks you're cute, and we have weed and beer. Just get in, let's go." I again declined politely. This whole time the girls have said nothing. I started walking up the road towards my house, and the dude pulled out of the lot and started following me in the truck. A couple of 100 feet up the road, a railroad bridge with a retaining wall crossed over the road they were on, and on the other side I could go through a very small wooded area and into my neighborhood. I went up the embankment and started crossing the tracks. I could see down onto the road, and dude was leaning out of his truck window and looking back at me. Well, I kept walking and I saw him pass the first turn into my neighborhood. Good, I was home free. My house was 3 blocks up from the bottom of the hill, and I ran like a mofo. I got to the third block, and what comes over the crest of the hill? A pickup. It wasn't moving very quickly or anything, so I easily made it to the front porch of our duplex before it passed. I told my dad about it a couple of days later, and he freaked out. For about a month, he insisted on driving along my paper route until I was done. The first time a guy in a car pulled up alongside me and asked if he could buy an extra paper off of me, my dad pulled up and yelled at him to move along. Never saw the truck again.